Today's daf is daf Kuf Tes. And the Mishnah, which began on the bottom of Kuf Ches Amud Beis, with Hamagarish es ha'isha v'chzira muteres liyavam, now quotes the dissenting view, l'chumra, of Rabbi Eliezer Oser. So he prohibits yibum and he requires chalitza. And the Gemara is going to explain in many different ways what underlies the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. V'chein hamagarish es hayisoma, and in this case, he had married a ketana with kedushin d'Rabbanan, and then he was, he was megarish her, and then v'chzira, and he remarried her. So initially, when he divorced his wife, who's a ketana yisoma, he becomes asura on his brother with what's called an iser gruchas achiv. Again, all this is the Rabbanan. But now he remarries her, muteres liyavam. And this is based on the principle called misa mapeles, which we'll see a little bit later on, as opposed to what's called nisuin richonim mapilu. So if we went back to the original nisuin, then there was an iser erva of grushas achiv that was already generated, and that would remove yibum. But since he remarried her, and we're going to hold now that misa mapeles, so that the nefila for yibum begins at the moment of misa. At that point, the Torah, for the sake of yibum, was matir the iser eshisach. But Rabbi Eliezer again, oser. He doesn't allow yibum, and he requires chalitza. Ana shehitzia aviha. And now we're talking about kedushay doraisa of a ketana, v'niskarcha, and he divorced his wife while she was a ketana. In that case, the father would receive the get from the Baal. And now the father has no longer reshus over her. She becomes what's called the Yisoma B'chaya Av. And V'chzira, if he remarries her, now he's married to her on a level of a Kiddushi D'Rabbanan. But Divrei HaKol Asur L'Yavam. Here, even the Rabbanan will have to concede that she's Asur L'Yavam, because once there was Gerushin on the first round, that generated an Isur Doraisa of Grushas Achiv. And now that he remarries her with Kedushay D'Rabbanan as a Yisoma, those Kedushay D'Rabbanan could not undermine the Isur Erva Doraisa of Grushas Achiv. Omar Eifa, my Taima Rabbi Eliezer. And Eifa is going to suggest one approach to understand the underlying Isur formulated by Rabbi Eliezer, and then Eifa is going to have to back down. What was his original position? Hoil the Omda Olav Cha Achas Isura. Since after the first Gerushin, she became Grushas Achiv, that Isur could not be subject to the matir of Nefila for Yibum. Omle Rabbana Liefa, if you're correct, we're going to prove in just a minute that Rabbi Eliezer certainly requires chalitza, but according to you, that she remains a gruchas achiv, which is an erva that patters up both chalitza and yibum. So why does Rabbi Eliezer require chalitza? El Amar Eifa Rabbi Eliezer lo yadana. My time, I can't. I concede that I cannot understand the logic of Rabbi Eliezer. And now the Gemara proceeds to offer a number of different possibilities how to understand Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Abaye, Hainu time to Rabbi Eliezer. What's the reason Rabbi Eliezer says that on the one hand there's no heter yibum, but on the other hand she needs a chalitza? And the answer is that Rabbi Eliezer was vacillating between two possibilities, and he didn't know which one was correct. So therefore, he's going to go l'chumra to prohibit Yibum, but at the same time, l'chumra, to require chalitza to be mater al shuk. And Mesafkala, imisa mapeles, inesuin rishonim mapeles. The Gemara is going to now explain. Imisa mapeles, or Ramya kame liyibum. If we focus all our attention on the moment of Misa, when the brother dies and his wife is projected for Yibum with a Zikas Yibum, at that point, she was Eshes Ach, vis-a-vis the Yovam, and now the Torah, for the sake of the mitzvah of Yibum, will be Matir, the Isser Eshes Ach. So for sure, there would be Yibum. So what was Rabbi Eliezer's vacillation? Why did he hesitate? Because Nesuin Rishonim Apilim. And that means that already at the time of Nesuin, you have two brothers, one brother married a wife. At that moment that he married a wife, there already is inherent in that marriage a potential for Yibum. And the ultimate nefila for Yibum, or shall we say the ultimate projection of the Zikas Yibum, to require Yibum, is inherent, it's latent in the original Nesuin. Now, at the time of the original Nesuin, as a result of the fact that he divorced her, she became Grushas Achiv. And she no longer now would fall under Yibum after he remarries her. Why? Because Ha'amda Olav Sha'achas Be'isu. At the very moment of Gerushin, when the husband, now he's already gone, but when he was alive and he divorced her, at that moment in time, the status of his wife as a Grusha was that of an Erva vis-a-vis his Ach. And we already anticipate the Nefila for Yibum even during his lifetime because of the principle called Nesuin Rishonim Apilim. And since Rabbi Elazar was vacillating back and forth between these two polar extremes, he therefore came to the middle compromise sheet that we're not going to allow Yibum, and that's based on Nesuin Rishonim Apilim, but on the other hand, we're going to require Chalitza based on the principle of Misa Mapelis. That's Abaye. Now we go on to Rav, and soon we'll see Rav Ashi. Rava Amar, what's the underlying logic of Rabbi Eliezer? Li'olam pshita Rabbi Eliezer to be samapelis. No, Rabbi Eliezer did not come up with this new radical understanding of Nesuin Mapili. No, it's Misa Mapelis. However, we have to consider what the people out there, the spectators, what they know and what they don't know. Miu akol b'kiyim v'gerushin. Gerushin, according to Rava, is some sort of a public act. Everyone is aware of the get. It's not news. It's like splashed on the front pages. But v'ein akol b'kiyim v'chazara. Not everyone realizes that he remarried his divorced wife, and therefore the chashash is they're going to think that you could be miyabim grushas achiv. So therefore they had to prohibit this, even though Misa Mapeles, even though he remarried her and the Zika is generated by his second marriage with her, the second time around, because people don't know about the fact that he remarried her. They're aware of the get. And they think that she fell for Yibum to the brother, even though she was Gruchas Achiv. And by the way, there's a lot of logic behind that. It's not just Amaratzis. Because just like the Torah through Yibum was Matir Eishes Ach, the Torah was Matir Gruchas Achiv, which is not true, but one could certainly appreciate it. And now the Gemara rejects Rav. Why? Adrab, on the contrary. You know what's public? The remarriage is public. Everybody knows that he's living with her as husband and wife. They may not know about the original get. Chazra, when he remarries her, came into Yosfa to say she's living in his house as a wife. Islay Kol, everybody knows about that. He's not living in sin. And therefore the Gemara says Rava has to be re-understood. Gemara says the following. Milo askinon da hadre biurta ushachiv b'tzafra. The Gemara gives a very dramatic case, just to convey the point. Maybe what happened was he remarried her at night, and he died the very next morning. So the word didn't get out that he was machzir grushasa. That's what Rava has in mind. Again, it doesn't have to be so extreme, so dramatic, but it means that if within a short period of time after he remarried her, he died, people don't necessarily know about the fact that he remarried her. And again, you get back to the chash that people will think that you're allowed to be miyabim grushas och. But now we come to the final understanding of Eliezer, and my impression is that that's the one that the Gemara accepts. Rav Ashi Omer Hainu time with Rabbi Eliezer, the Gozar Hani Mishum Yisoma B'chayav V'chzira. We had the case in the Sefer, if you remember, where the original marriage to this Ketana was Doraisa, and the original get that the husband delivered to his wife was Doraisa, and that's because the father married off his wife as a Ketana. Subsequently, following that marriage, which is Doraisa, the father, accepted her get. And now he remarries her as a Yisoma B'chayavia, which means only Nitzuin D'Rabbanan. And the rabbinic issues cannot override the erva of Grushas Achiv. And the Gemara now supports Rav Ashi, because since the Mishnah mentions this immediately in the Sefer, it's no coincidental fact that it was now mentioned in the Sefer. It was actually added at this juncture in the Mishnah in order to give us an explanation for Rabbi Eliezer Shita as it appears at the beginning of the Mishnah. Ketana Shisi Avia Vigirsha, V'Nisgarsha. Ki Yisom V'Chayav V'Chzira. Divrei HaKol. Even the Rabbanan agree Shasur L'Yavam. And you might ask, Hai Mai L'Meimer Pshita. Certainly no one would even entertain the idea that an Erva Doraisa, namely Grushas Achiv, could be subject to Hafkah, to be materid, through Nisuin D'Rabbanan. Because when he remarries her, she had already left the domain of her father. It's purely a Nisuin D'Rabbanan. Elolav, if we want to give some sort of justification why the Mishnah had to write this, Hakamashmal, and it's really just revealing the time of the Reisha, meaning Rabbi Eliezer Shita in the Reisha, the Gazar Hanach Mishum Hai Shmamina. That in the case of the Reisha, where the original marriage was the Rabbanon, the reason why Rabbi Eliezer will not allow Yibum is because of Xera, where the original marriage was Doraisa when she was married off by her father. And now the Gemara is going to quote a brisa to support Rav Ashi. Tanya Kavasi the Rav Ashi, Modim Chachamim l'Rabbi Eliezer B'Ktana She'isi Avia. In this case, the Ishus is Doraisa, V'Nisgarsha. And then she becomes a Yisoma B'Chayavia. And they married her off. When he remarried her, Zira, her first husband remarried her. And that's Nisuin D'Rabbanan. And now he dies, and she falls for even to his brother. Asura liyava mipnei shegerusheh gerushin gemurin. We're talking about gerushin from a marriage of her father, which is now gerushin doraisa, that generates an erva of grushas achiv doraisa. The ein chazarosa chazor gemura, meaning it's not doraisa when he remarries her because she's already yisoma. And the Brisa continues, Bamedvar Mamurim, when do the Chachamim concede to Rabbi Eliezer that there's an Isur Yibum that's only Shegersha Kshiktana, V'Echzira Kshiktana, which means that his remarriage to her was a Nesuin D'Rabbanan, which is not powerful enough to be Matir, the Ishrei Shesach of Grushas Achiv, when he dies. Aval Gersha Kshiktana, here's a case where even the Rabbana will be moded to Rabbi Eliezer B'Chzira Kshigidola. If, let's say, the father married her off when she was a Ketana, then subsequently he divorced her. Then he waited till she became a Gedola. and he remarried her. And at that point, he generates Kiddushin Dorais because she's a Gedola. Or Inami, another possible scenario, is a Chzira Kshi Ketana V'Godla Etzlo, if he remarries her while she's a Ketana. But she now became a Gedola. In these cases, Umeis, Ocholetzes Omis Yabemes. And why is that so? Because now the second marriage is Doraisa, and we're holding that Misa Mapeles, and therefore the Misa is going to be Matu, the Iser Eishes Ach, and for that matter, the Erva of Gruchas Achiv, because now we're dealing with two Doraisas, and they're both on the same level. And that's because when he remarried her, she was already a Gedol, or she became a Gedol. However, on that point itself, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Amru Choletzes Velomis Yabemes. Again, even though Misa Mapeles, and the Nefila for Yibam is going to be Mata the Yisrael Ach from the first marriage. But nevertheless, we're not going to allow the Yibum, and it's all based on a Gzera because of the scenario in which he remarried her on a Drabbana level, and that would certainly be an Iser of Erva Doraisa because the marriage, the Ishus Drabbana, cannot be Mata the Iser, the Erva Doraisa of Grushas Achiv. It's crystal clear from this brisa that the logic and the underlying motivation of Rabbi Eliezer's Isur is because of the situation of a marriage d'oraisa through her father, and then she became a Yisoma B'chayavia, and he remarried her with a Kedushin d'Rabbanan. And that Kedushin d'Rabbanan, which even the Chachamim of Rabbi Eliezer concede, could not be mat to the erva of Gushasa. Boy, Minei Rav Mirav Nachman, Farasa Mahu. When Rabbi Eliezer prohibits Yibum to the brother, when, let's say, Reuven dies and his wife Rachel falls for Yibum to Shimon, and Rabbi Eliezer paskins that there's an Iser Yibum, and that's because she is Grushas Achiv based on the first Gerushin, even though he remarried her. So now Rachel falls for Yibum to Shimon. However, Reuven had another wife. We'll call her Leah. What's the story as far as Leah the Tzara is concerned? Can Shimon be Miyabim the Tzara? And if you ask me, I would say there's no reason why not. So Rasamau, Omalei, he gufa Gzera, Vanan Nekum Benigza Gzera Gzera. I mean, what logic, what rhyme or reason can you have to prohibit the Tzara? There's no reason in the world to prohibit the Tzara. Even Rachel herself should fall for Yibam, if not for the Gzera D'Rabbanan, or to a case where the original marriage was Doraisa, etc., etc. So that would be a Gzera. So now the Gemara is going to raise an objection to Rav Nachman, who claims that Rabbi Eliezer would be Matu the Tzara. But Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Omru, he v'tzarasa choletzes. Only chalitza. And we're talking about tzarasa. The Gemara realizes that we have to amend the brisa. Without an emendation, we cannot understand this brisa, because what do you mean, he v'tzarasa? There's never, ever a situation in halacha where there's chalitza to both he and tzarasa. Elalav, you're going to have to refurbish this brisa. Tzarasa choleses. But in any event, you see that there's no yibum for the tzaras. The question is lav tirutzi komentaritz. Once you're already amending the brisa and you realize that the brisa as is not reliable, which is quite frequent, then we're going to read the brisa the following way: he choleses, but tzarasa choleses omis yabin. Now the Mishnah here on Daf Kuf Tes addresses the case of two brothers that married two sisters. So we're talking about Kiddushin D'Rabbanan of two sisters, which means that when one brother dies and his wife falls for Yibum, then there's a possibility, we'll see in the various scenarios, of mitzvah of Yibum D'Oraisa, but what's blocking that Yibum D'Oraisa is the fact that on a D'Rabbanan level, he's married to a sister, and therefore she's a Chos Ishta. Meis Baila Shalachas Me'em Alazu Teitze Mishum Achos Isha. So now the husband dies and his wife falls for Yibum. But again, the Yovam is married to his wife's sister, get all on a Drabana level of Tano, Shisiua, Acheha, is Teitze, Halazu Teitze, this Almana can marry anyone, Mishum Achos Isha, because there's no Yibum or Chalitz. Again, this only makes sense because the original Yibum or Zikas Yibum was only Drabana, because the whole marriage was only Drabana. So Drabana could play games over here, so to speak. It's like silly putty, and they could decide that there's no Yibum and no Chalitza. In other words, we're going to consider it as if it's Achos Ishto, because the same Achos Ishto that was generated by the first marriage still exists vis-a-vis the Yibum situation. So the same halach will apply to two sisters that are Chereshos. But now we get to a little bit more of a complex situation. Gidola, one of the sisters, was already 12 years old, etc., and therefore the marriage the Ishus was Doraisa, and the other sister was a Ketana, which means the marriage is only Ishus D'Rabbanan. And now we're going to have to go through two scenarios. Who died, meaning and who fell for Yibum to whom? Scenario number one. Meis Baila Shel Ketana. Okay, fine. The Baila Shel Ketana died. The Ketana falls for Yibum. She's Achos Ishto. There's no possibility of Yibum, obviously. And not only that, Teitze Ketana Mishum Achos Isha. She doesn't even require Chalitza. And this is a classic case of an erev of Achos Isha that doesn't allow for Yibum nor require Chalitza. Oh. Now we switch it around. Meis Baila Shel Gedola. The Baal had married a Gedola with Kedusha Doraisa. When he dies, she falls for Yibum Doraisa. What's blocking her is the Erva D'Rabbanan in this case of Achos Ishto. And why is it only D'Rabbanan? Because his marriage to his sister was marriage of a Ketana. It's only D'Rabbanan. So what do we do in this situation? On the one hand, we're very eager to fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum Doraisa. But on the other hand, we have this impediment, this blockage of an Erev of Achos Isha D'Rabbanan. And it would seem to you and I think the best solution to this problem is miyun. Let her be mima'enes, the Ketana, be mima'enes. She's out of the picture now. She's not Achos Ishto anymore, and therefore Yibum, you've cleared the pathway for Yibum. And that's exactly what Rabbi Eliezer advocates. And that really works beautifully because that's going to be okay any sort of marriage relationship between him and the Ketana, which means that the Gedola is now all systems clear. She's not Achos Ishto. The Gemara is going to mention later on that this is not such a simple solution because in general, we really try to discourage miyun. But okay, Rabbi Eliezer wants to set up an exception to the rule in the case of the mitzvah doraisa of Yibum. Rabbi Gamliel Omer was very inhibited about encouraging miyun. In miyana, fine. She did the miyun, and the gedola falls for Yibum. But in lav, if she did not do miyun, she's very happy with her marriage relationship. So now, what happens is when the brother who's married to the Gedola dies, she, the Ketana, becomes Achos Zikukasam. However, Rabbi Gamliel holds Ein Zika, which is a machlokes that we had earlier in Masechet Yevamot, where the Yesh Zika or Ein Zika. So if Rabbi Gamliel maintains that Ein Zika, So there's nothing to generate an Isser of the Ketan al Baila. And therefore, why should we break up that marriage? Tamtin, let the Ketana wait. Ad Tagdil again. What we need is to create Nesuin Da'oraisa, Ishus Da'oraisa. And in order to do so, we have to wait until she becomes a Gedola. Now, it's a very strange thing over here. When it says we wait until she's a Gedola, Rashi at least interprets it to mean that we're going to prohibit an intimacy between the Baal and his wife, who's a Ketana. And the question is, why? If we're holding Ein Zika, there's no Isser Vakotz Kukaso, why does Rashi insist Tamtin means Veloti Boilo, Ad Shetagdil? So in the note here in Masifta, he says, Meikar din eni neseres labaila, mishum achos kukaso, sharei Rav Gamliel sover ein zika. Umikolakom mechuar hadavar. It's fair. Sheyoval aktana, the akhosaz kukalo, lo tiftar bibiazu. That bia is not going to patter up the Gedola from Yibum. So it's a funny kind of beer. It's Mechuar Adavri says. Okay, fine. Now she becomes a Gedola, and her marriage now matures to become Nesuin Dorai. So the Teitel Azu, the Achos HaGedola, now goes out without Yibum, without Chalitza, Mishum Achosisha, because she's now Achosisha on a Doraisa level, because the marriage to the sister, who was a Kana, now evolved to become a marriage Doraisa. Now let's point out here that we could ask the question: why do we have to go through this whole rigmarole? Why not just give a chalitza from the beginning? And the answer is because that would generate an iser on the ketana of achotz chalutas. And that has nothing to do with that discussion earlier about yesh zika or ein zika. Now we have the third shita of Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, ilo or oilo al ishto, the oilo al eshes achiv. He's in a no-win situation here. There's no way that he can get out of this situation and be miyabim any of the two wives, because Rabbi Yeshua holds yesh zika. And if Rabbi Yeshua holds yesh zika, the ketana is asur al yavam mishum achos kukasa. And now stay in asuros. One is asura mishum achos kukaso, and the gedol is asura mishum eshes achos ishto. And therefore, motzias ishto beget ves eshes achiv bechalitza. His wife, who's now achos kukaso, we have to let her free with a get. But as far as eshes achiv is concerned, we're going to give her chalitza. He cannot be miyabim her after he divorces his wife, because once he divorces his wife, she becomes a chos grushasa. And therefore, the only option here is chalitza. The Gemara asks the following: how could Rabbi Eliezer encourage the ketana to be mima'enes umi shari vatani bar kapara the olam yidvak other b'shlosh dvarim yisrachik b'shlosh yidvak b'shlosh dvarim chalitza b'avasholem b'afaras nedarim. Gemara is going to go through each one of these. Yisrachik b'shlosh dvarim. He should stay far clear of mina miyun, mina pikdonos, mina arbonos. Again, we'll get into each one of them separately. But what's clear is that miyun has to be discouraged. So the Gemara answers miyun to mitzvah shining. In this case, that miyun will allow and facilitate the mitzvah doraisa of yibum. Then we'll look aside at whatever hesitation we have about miyun, as we'll soon see. Kufa, Tani bar kapar liolam, idvak adam b'shlosh dvar b'chalitza. Let's go through each of the three, one by one. First, he advocates Chalitz Kabashol, the Tanya Abishol, Omer Akori says Yevimto, L'Shem Noi, L'Shem Ishus, L'Shem Davar Acher, Kilu Pogdeh B'Erva, V'Karov B'Einai, Leo Savlad Mamzer. So Abishol takes a very strong, harsh position, and he says that Yibum is a very dangerous enterprise, because if he has in mind that he wants to marry her because she's nice looking, or he wants to have a marriage relationship, he doesn't want to be left without a wife, or any other motivation other than the mitzvah of Yibum, it's like he's being pogea in Eishes Ach. The Torah was only makta the Yisra Eishes Ach if he's konta exclusively, without any other benefits, purely l'shem mitzvah. And it's as if he was pogea be Eishes Ach, and therefore the child is a mamzer. Bavash Shalom, Tichsiv Bakei Shalom, Virad Fehu.